Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. Today's an exciting day. We're looking forward to this day for a very long time. Season 2 on the Seforim of Chaim Kanievsky. After we did a bunch following Reb Chaim's Petira, there was no discussion of Season 1 and Season 2. But as we kept on getting the feedback that we kept on getting, this gave the fuel to Rabbi Dr. Brut to just dive in to this endless topic of Reb Chaim's Seforim and all the Seforim that he used. And each episode really goes on a tangent, as Rabbi Brut likes to say, tangents upon tangents, of exploring different Seforim and Rishonim and the history. Truly fascinating. And we have a sponsor who is sponsoring the season of Reb Chaim Kanievsky's Seforim. And all he wants mentioned is that this is going to be L'ilui Nishmas Moshe Chaim ben Yitzchak David. So the knowledge and the learning that comes out of these episodes should be an Eloi for his neshama. Rabbi Brut, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem.
Good. Okay, so we ended off, for those that remember, and you could go back, they're all available on Oldaf. We could put into the bottom of the video exactly how to find them, where to find them. Baruch Hashem, we have Usher Tesser behind the scenes producing, and he'll let everybody know on the video and the emails and in the messages how to find all the previous episodes. So we ended off discussing Derech Emunah, which I think we called Reb Chaim's seminal work. We mentioned that that was something that was put onto his kever, so obviously something that was special by Reb Chaim. And we discussed the history of learning Seder Zerayim throughout the generations, and where Reb Chaim came in to the picture after the Rishonim and Achronim and later Achronim that had written Seforim and works on Zerayim. So today's topic, and we may spend more than one topic on this, is we mentioned that Reb Chaim, and we know that the Chazon Ish has writings about it. So we're going to focus on this, the topic of using new manuscripts of Rishonim that are found throughout the generations. We know the Chazon Ish has, and Eliezer is going to explore this in depth, has things that are rumored about what he said, what he actually wrote about this, and what the other Gedolei Yisrael hold about this. You know, what did they use? But I think that's the place where Rabbi Brut is going to start season 2.
Yes, I'm going to start with that in 1 second. I'm just backtracking for 1 second to begin with the Akaras HaTov at the outset of season 2, because I never imagined that there will be so many episodes up till date. We're up to 10 episodes we already did. I never learned to Sugi of Reb Chaim and his vast literature carefully. I still didn't. I don't know if I ever will be Zeicha to, because it's never ending. But thanks to Oldaf for hosting it, for Moshe Shwed and Usher Tesser working on all the technical aspects, spending hours. There's lots of times different things go wrong. It's lots of sometimes there's different delays. It's not easy. To be clear, these episodes were not paid for up till now by. This was just a volunteer basis of everyone over here. We found someone, Baruch Hashem, who offered to help with the production of the course of season 2. And as they say, Amen Kemach Ein Torah, so Baruch Hashem for that. But these episodes take many hours to prepare. All feedback is appreciated. All comments of all types, especially in the next few weeks. If we have to bear out, as it's going to take time to get to what we want to say. And in the past, people reach out and say with different ideas of different shiurim that they want people to give. And the answer is they could be given. But, okay, now, so the first point that I would like to do is to take a deep dive in something that we already mentioned from the outset in different Seforim of Chaim Kanievsky, is that if you look carefully, you see that he's mamish up to date with the Rishonim that are out there on the market. He's not just using the standard, let's say, Ritva Raj Ramban, who said that is even standard, but for some reason we accept that to be standard. He's quoting everything. Just to mention what I'm referring to, they printed in the Sefer Seforim, which I've quoted numerous times, some pages of his card catalog, so to speak, of Seforim that he had, which we'll return to. But let's say in Masechtas Kedushin, he lists. He says the Taisis Rid, Taisis Rosh, Kedusha Ramban, then he has Kedusha Ritva, Meiri, Talmud Arashba. Then he has Mari Berav, Shitan Lord Lumi, Eitza Ga'inim, he mentions, and the few different classical achreinim that he has and other rishonim that he gets as time goes on, that are only coming out as time moves on. So we see he's using these svarim. In the introduction of Derech Emunah, he spells out clearly that he's using stuff that he just got from manuscript. That he was zeicha. Some of the stuff wasn't even on the market at the time. He had connections, so to speak. He had the Yerushalmi based on manuscripts on Zraim. He had the Rashi manuscript. He had the Rimalki Tzedek that was just published from manuscript, and other such things. Right away, if you open up the Derech Emunah from Chaim Kanievsky, you don't have to turn anywhere before the first page. He's already quoting Talmidei Rabbeinu Tam Baba Kama that's put out by the Bloi. He's quoting Meiri's immediately, Rabbeinu Gershom Baba Basra, which is on the side of the Gemara, only published by Shas in the Shas Vilna for the first time in the 1880s. So we see Chaim Kanievsky, and we've mentioned different things we've thrown out that he's using all the new Rishonim. Now, so the point at hand, what's the point of all this, is that, first of all, it's an interesting topic in my biased opinion, and it's worthy of exploring carefully. As we'll see, it's a great importance to study the library of an Adam Gadol. It can help us understand him. We could see what he saw. Sometimes we can learn his methods, how to learn up sugyas based on some of these things that we'll hopefully pull out. And throughout this presentation, in the next few episodes, also we'll see practical examples of some of the tools and why it could be helpful, possibly in someone else's in your own learning. It's very important to study in general. Libraries are very important. L'mashal, the famous Rabbi Yehuda ibn Tibbon wrote a tzavah to his son Shmuel ibn Tibbon, that something to the effect. First, he says something that, make sure you have a nice library so you can lend to people, and this is in the Middle Ages. Then he says, "V'da midivrei ish v'svaroi meidim al tzafon sichloi v'sisroi." You can learn a lot from the person's svarim, what he has, what his interests are, and stuff like that. We know a famous thing from Rabbi Yitzchak Kanpanton. This is before the Beis Yosef. Says, "Ein chachmas adam magas ela ad makam shesvar magiyim." So therefore, he says, "L'chein yimkar adam kol ma sheyesh lo v'yiknes svarim." Svarim are very important, and there's a lot to say about this. Okay. Now, what's significant over here is that knowing what I hope to show a lot of times is, if you understand the bibliographical information, when Svarim are available and everything, it's going to help understand a lot of different things. Okay. This is a short Hagdama to what we hope to accomplish.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction. In the past, you've mentioned many times that the Reb Chaim Kanievsky in his Seforim, you could see the quote-unquote influence of 4 different people from previous generations and this generation. His father, the Stipler, the Mishnah Brura, and then going further back, right, the Vilna Gaon, and back to the Chazon Ish, obviously his uncle as well. I'm sure these people played a role in how Reb Chaim went to the sugya of using new manuscripts and Rishonim as well.
Right. Yes. That is definitely what I would use as a springboard to get into. Based on that introduction that I've mentioned a bunch of times, yeah, exactly. So to be more specific, is as follows. I want to show that if one looks at the Mishnah Brura very carefully and understands how the Mishnah Brura is written, and then we'll be able to see that this was a model that we already mentioned that in a lot of aspects he took the Mishnah Brura, even in how it looks like it's mamish, looks like a Mishnah Brura with a sharatzin and everything. He used it even further. Okay, now, so for this point, as a general introduction, there's the Mishnah Brura, which we're going to quote a few pieces from the Mishnah Brura about his method specifically with the Rishonim. And then throughout today, we'll give specific examples of certain Rishonim. But as far as the Chazon Ish, his Shita, which has become known as Chazon Ish, is opposing using new Rishonim. There's that the Shita exists and is true on some extent, one could see from different places. Already in 1954, the Chazon Ish, it was out in the world, already in Switzerland. The Sridei Eish writes in a letter to Rav Herzog. He says, Omnam be'eretz Yisrael, mafitzim shmua b'shem hagoyin ha-Chazon Ish, she'ein lavi raya, she'ein lahavi as tshuvas hagoyin v'sifra rishonim shenimtzau achar beis Yosef b'cheshben achra halacha. Don't bring anything that they found after the Beis Yosef went to print. Don't bring it involved. It's not important for the world of halacha. And so he heard this shita of the Chazon Ish. Rav Dessler in Eretz Yisrael, who was zeicha to have, while he was in Eretz Yisrael, it seems a close kesher with the Chazon Ish. He also brings it down in a letter talking about it, and we'll see perhaps later on more about what exactly Rav Dessler says with this thing. But the problem is with the Chazon Ish in general, to understand what bothered him, what exactly was his shita. A lot of ink has been spilled in the past bunch of years trying to understand it. What caused them to create such a shita, and what exactly was his issues. In general, it has to be spoken out as follows. The Chazon Ish wrote an incredible amount. A lot of it he published. Not everything that he published did he himself publish. He had people helping him. He had nephews helping him and others. In recent years, it's ki'ilu the Chazon Ish has not stopped writing. There's so much material that keeps on coming and coming and coming. The gift that keeps on giving. Lamashal in recent years, there's a set called Gnazim V'Tshuvas Chazon Ish. This has tons of new material, and sometimes what the problem is that, and this is a great problem in general with the Chazon Ish, in order to understand a shita of his, you have to know the context, what's going on. And when it was published in the various writings, pieces are taken out, things, and we don't know the context. Why was he saying what he's saying? And in order to understand things, many times, especially in halacha, you need to understand the context. So Rabbi Binyamin Zilber in Shuvas Az Nidbru quotes in a few different places, and he was some person who knew the Chazon Ish, was into the Chazon Ish, has letters of the Chazon Ish, says in general, take for example the Kovetz Igros of the Chazon Ish, very hard to rely on, because we don't always know the context. And a lot of times when you go through the new data that keeps on coming out, so someone could have written about the Chazon Ish in the 1980s. He says one way, because he only had X amount of material. And it just keeps on coming more and more things, and we now get more and more insight to understand what the Chazon Ish held. Okay, so Mir Hashem, I hope to present in the future what the Chazon Ish holds based on collecting from as many places as I was able to find that he talks about specifically. Okay, but in general, just to say it in one sentence, is he's opposed to the usage of new discoveries of Rishonim. Okay, now, but the Mishnah Berurah is not. What does that mean? The Mishnah Berurah is not. So here we have, again, I've quoted numerous times that the best source for the Mishnah Berurah is his son. But before we get to his son, already in the Mishnah Berurah himself writes in the Hagdama a line towards the end of his introduction, after he lists the Seforim that he had, the Seforim he used, Gam chipasti b'sifrei Rishonim, ule emtza behem hadavar mefurish hashar raya brura, ki baruch Hashem yeshli harba sifrei Rishonim. So first of all, we see he's very proud of this. He mentions it. It's very important to him that he has a lot of Rishonim. What does the word a lot of Rishonim mean? So I hope in the next few weeks we'll be able to understand more what that means. But I use them, but it sounds like he owns them. You say there's a lot of legends and all different types of stories of how did he have all this stuff. Here it sounds like at least the Sefer Rishonim he owned. Now, the Chavetz Chaim's son, who helped him, as we mentioned in previous episodes in this first season, helped him with the writing of the Mishnah Berurah. So at one point he writes that when we learned, he was amal to get a hold of every Rishon that was out there. Even Achrayim he also tried to get a hold of, but Rishonim was very important to him. Elsewhere he writes in the same, the Chavetz Chaim's son elsewhere describes this as, he says, when we learned, we would start from scratch, especially when we were working on the Mishnah Berurah, because they also worked on other projects, and we learned Kol Sifrei HaRishonim. And he starts listing, and he says, we started with the Rif, and after we learned the Sugya, of course, with all the parallels, we learned the Rif, the Rambam. Then he skips and he starts listing at Rishonim. He says, Taisis, the Rush, Chachmei Tzarfas, Smag, Trumar, Zarua. Then he goes on to Gedolei Sfara, Ramban, Rashba, Ritva, Ran, Meiri, Ve'itur. V'gam Rishonim, Kamaya Shultis, Ubahag. We did not skip those either. So in short, the Mishnah Berurah made it his business to get a hold of the Rishonim, and he uses it. Another time he writes the same thing. So basically, the Chavetz Chaim's son writes this in another place in the Sefer that we got and learned, etc. So we see it was very important for him to see all this. Now, it was so important for him, Rishonim in general. In 1902, the Rashba Menachos, or later on, it's not really, we know it's not really the Rashba, but it's for sure a Rishon. he goes ahead. It was printed in 1861 for the first time and hadn't been available, and he makes sure to publish it to make sure for people learning Kachim that they should have it available. So we see he has a tremendous love for Rishonim. Okay, now one has to keep in mind that we're spoiled. You walk into any Seforim store, any shul, and people in their homes waiting for their bar mitzvahs have been getting sets of Rishonim. This was an unheard of thing even 50 years ago. Forget about as the further back you go. Okay. Now, just to mention two, three examples in a broad sense with the Chafetz Chaim, and then we'll move on to the main points over here, is in a Sharet Tzion in Reish Ches, where he's talking about the nusach of the bracha ala michya, how we end off. So he brings down the Magen Avram, says we say ala michya of ala kalkala. Where's the Magen Avram source? Says the Mishnah Berurah from the Torah and Avodraham. But the Beis Yosef already, he says, brings down Rishonim that say not like this, and then he says v'chein nimtza b'shem Rabbeinu Chananel huva b'shibala eleka v'ar zeruah v'chein b'shibala eleka misefar pardes v'chein kasavari vaz v'chein hu b'rekeach v'kolbay v'Rabbeinu Yeruchah v'chein mash b'chadushay harajba, etc. So he here it's not. I'm not trying to show him using fancy Rishonim, so to speak, but he's using a lot of Rishonim that you have to understand. In the 1880s, it wasn't found so easily, and this is what he's proud of. He's using it to argue on the Magen Avram. Now, it turns out it might not be that there's no one that holds the other side. He even begins his piece, the Torah and Avodraham, but that's beyond the scope of our discussion. Lamashal, a quick search shows he quotes the Ritva over 700 times in the Mishnah Berurah. That's a remarkable number. Again, why? Because we're going to see the Ritva wasn't so available. Not everyone had it. Like today, every bar mitzvah boy a few years ago still was getting a set of cooked Ritva. It was a big thing. And just to conclude, one last general example, he's talking about a specific thing, and then he says, there's a halachas psukais shenitvas ke'es miksav yad that also supports what he was trying to bring out, and he quotes halachas psukais also a few times. So we see, and this anyone who learns Mishnah Berurah, which most people today are very familiar with the Sefer, you're always seeing he's talking about hanitpas michadash and this and that. So we know he does it. Okay, that's the general background with the Mishnah Berurah.
So you want to give an example of a few that may be a chiddush that these were printed recently and he still uses those?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to give some. I would like to give some more specific example and with our story to move on with our story. The following is like this: there's a chibur the Ar Zarua. In the Ar Zarua, Lamashal, in the Mishnah Berurah in Bir Halacha Siman Lama Beis, he says as follows: Kine Eis Ke'Eis Shezachinu LaAr Shel Ar Zarua Gadol Shenitbas B'Yameinu Matzasi. A search shows that he brings the Ar Zarua something like 308 times. Okay, now the numbers are not exact because of different aspects of getting numbers, but he quotes it quite a few hundred times. Some of them are because of the Darkei Moshe, which he had, and that was they had. However, what's the story with this Ar Zarua? So the story briefly is it's a incredible work from a Rishon who was active. It seems he's born around 1250. He's born in 1180, dies in 1250. So he's an early Rishon. Tons of Messiahs of Rishonim are also found in here, besides his own stuff, and it's very, very important. But Rishonim had it, and then it disappears. A lot of work has been done about this. Just to mention, there's a master's from Dr. Uzi Fuchs with some articles, and most recently, Professor Simcha Emanuel in the Ali Sefer Journal 31 has a whole article with the history of the print, how it came to be printed, because it seems to be that it was lost at a certain point in time. We're not clear exactly when it was lost, but it seems the Ramah had it. In Darkei Moshe, he uses it extensively. And it seems that he's quoting it from a primary source, but as already as a generation or two later, the Maram says we don't have it in Europe already. So it got lost somewhere around there. Just to understand a little bit what's the significance of this, Rebbe Margolis points out something that we find in the Bir Halacha really also, is that the Magen Avram would a lot of times ask questions on the Ramah, whose a certain psak of his was based on Ar Zarua. But the Magen Avram did not have the Ar Zarua. We said it was already missing from the times in the Maram. It's a little before the Magen Avram. So but the Ramah had it. So he would argue on a certain psak of the Ramah because he had a question he didn't see. But it turns out when you open up the Ar Zarua, you'll see that the question is not a question. But the Ramah didn't bring down that part, but he knew that information. That's possibly why he reached his conclusion. Had the Magen Avram had the Ar Zarua, it's very possible that certain questions and certain psakim of his he wouldn't have even created had he had the Chibur. This is an interesting piece and theory that needs to be checked into much more of a Ruva Margolis and a Sefer Nefesh Chaim. But what the Mishnah Berurah does this all the time. He shows if you had Ar Zarua, you can understand much more, and he uses it in understanding even the Ramah, and also as he uses other Rishonim to be mitzaref for different sugyos. Now, when is this printed for the first time for manuscript? Only in 1862, and that's not even the complete thing. It takes time for the rest of it to be published. So you see that he's using the Mishnah Berurah is only really starts being published in the 1880s. Now, just understand, the Mishnah Berurah is not the only person that's excited about Ar Zarua. Many others are also, other Gedalim. I'm just going to mention one example. There's a Sefer Melechetz Chayfetz. Melechetz Chayfetz is written, his claim to fame is he was a Litvisher Rav, and he's an uncle, his name was Rabbi Cheskel Chayfetz. He's the uncle of the Ar Sameach. So, as far as Litvisher standards, that gives you a lot of coven. So, in short, he prints a sefer in 1874, and then he puts out another edition, additional part a few years later. What happens is he basically was asked a shaila about giving a get to a person that's a cheresh, and he didn't have open sources about it, so he goes and does major research, and he puts out a sefer about it. He says if the shaila came to him and he didn't know, so it's his job to explore this topic. He took a topic that there wasn't much written about, and he wrote all about it. Incredible. And then he comes out, he starts dealing with what about someone who's a cherish has to do with yibum and all different things. It needs shtaris. He creates the shtar for how the get should look and how with yibum and all different things. He goes through the sugis. So one of the things that he needed he's so excited when he finds Ar Zarua because the Ar Zarua had important information for his sefer. Anyway, point is that it was a sefer that it turns out, based on new stuff that we have in the Chazon Ish also used the Ar Zarua. So even though the Ar Zarua is a relatively new manuscript, and of course, if you go through Derech Emunah, you'll see it Keseder, and Chaim Kanievsky uses it in all his Seforim, and it's extremely important because there's a wealth of information in there. Mishnah Berurah is famous for one of the people I would say that made it more famous. So the Aruch HaShulchan also uses it Keseder. So there was precedent to use this sefer first being published from manuscript. It was lost for hundreds of years and only rediscovered again in 1862. So this will be one sample with the Mishnah Berurah in mind, and going to Reb Chaim Kanievsky also clearly using it, as I said, others also.
Is this something somewhat of a chiddush to Mishnah Berurah more than the Ramah? Because you mentioned the Ramah himself used it, right? You mean because it got lost in between the Ramah and the Mishnah Berurah? Is that where the significance is that Mishnah Berurah used it?
So that is a very good point you're raising, because like this, the whole, what does it mean the Chazon Ish is anti-manuscripts? The Beis Yosef is using manuscripts. Now, there was no print. The answer is that the Chazon Ish, when we'll fine-tune the Chazon Ish Shita, Chazon Ish has no problem as long as it's in the Beis Yosef, what the Beis Yosef used, and he includes that Ramah, then that's it. So after that, the Chazon Ish holds. So now the Ar Zarua, if the Ramah quotes Ar Zarua, the Chazon Ish is not talking about it. But now, if we have a piece that the Ramah doesn't bring down, because we opened up the 1862 edition or the later edition, that's where the Chazon Ish had. But excellent, help me fine tune the point. Yes.
Okay, fine.
So
So that's the Ar Zarua.
Yeah,
that's the Ar Zarua. Everyone knows that Meiri itself, you open the sefer, the shittas that he brings down there, the Rishonim, right? You don't find in, I shouldn't say any other Rishonim, but certainly not in the mainstream Rishonim. And we know the Chazon Ish, again, rumors, I'm sure you'll find specifically written things about the Meiri. So talk about the Meiri now for a few minutes.
Yeah, so the Meiri, it's interesting, is I have no idea why, but it seems as the Meiri gets a lot of bad rap, and this is one of the topics that he gets very bad rap. So before anything, so here we're stuck with, for example, one of the works that came out of the Chazon Ish a few years back was called Maisa Ish. So he starts putting out one volume of stuff about the Chazon Ish, another volume, and a third, ends up putting out 7 volumes. In one of the places, someone said something to him about a Meiri, that he saw something in a Meiri, and he says, I saw it in the Meiri, and the Chazon Ish says some very interesting lashon. A Meiri lo yomer zois. You say, it seems that it was a big chiddush. It says it can't be that the Meiri said it. Okay, I wasn't sure what that means, but it could be we will have an explanation at some point or another what that might mean. Interestingly enough, if you look, you'll find that on one hand, the Beis Yosef, who we just got finished saying that's what the Chazon Ish's guide is, he quotes the Meiri 4 times. Okay. In one of those 4 times, the Chazon Ish Punkt has a piece, and he says, "What can we do? You have to rely. We can rely on this Miri, and you can't argue on it." He says some lashon efshar. He brings down the Miri through this base Yosef, and he says, "Efshar limtais midivrei Rishonim ela midivrei." It has to be that there's something wrong with it, but not with a svara ba'alma. Basically, because this piece of the Miri is where in the base Yosef, as you look earlier, so he has no problem with it. Okay. Now, but I said that Miri gets a bad rap. Why? If you look in the Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah search will show that he quotes it 400 times, something like that. That's a remarkable number. Okay, now the Chida, which we'll get to also, he'll be part of the story eventually. He has the Miri, he sees the Miri in Ksav Yad, and he quotes it. I think the number at one point he quotes it 100 times. I would say that are himself. Some of those quotes are through the Shitim Mekubetzes, which we'll get to in a minute. Miri, when's he born? So the most current research, there's a lot of research been done on the Miri in general, but he's born in 1249, and it seems that he dies around 1315. Okay. He wrote a ton. He wrote on Shas. He wrote a Chibar, it's called Chibar Tshuva. He wrote on Mishlei. He wrote a Sefer on, that's very important for the Sugyos of Stam, called Kiryat Sefer. He's in close contact with the Rashba, has Chuvas with the Rashba. Okay. Now, in the old Afshirim that we gave on Yuma, I already mentioned that in 1766, a Chibur came out on Yuma called the Sich Yitzchak. He had the Miri on Ksav Yad on Yuma, and he used it. No problems. A few years later, Masechtas Megillah comes out from a manuscript. No problems. L'mashal Bavram ben Agra had it, was aware of it. And we're talking about in the 1770s, quoting it, no problem. Okay, where do we know about the Miri? If you learn Shitim Mekubetzes on Baba Kama, the Shitim Mekubetzes quotes it a ton. In other Masechtas, we don't know why, but he doesn't quote it. It could be he didn't have it. But the point is, it was quoted. Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sefer has an article which he wrote in Yeshurun where he says that he brings numerous sources, amongst them the Radal and the Rameir Simcha, that one of the side importances of the Meiri, besides for being a Rishon, is that it helps understand the Rambam. Okay. In relation to the Mishnah Berurah, I came across a very interesting point. I have the schus to be working on the writings of Reb Eitam Henkin Hashem Yinkam Damai, and in some of his writings he has some notes on the Mishnah Berurah. In there he noticed, if you look in the last volume of Mishnah Berurah, sometimes the Mishnah Berurah brings down, he says like this, Midivrei HaMeiri sheyeshli biksav yad. He says this more than once. It turns out that the Meiri, which is published on Sukkah in 1910, but the Mishnah Berurah is published in 1907. It turns out these pieces are found in the manuscript, today we have them, of the Meiri on Sukkah. So not only does the Chafetz Chaim quote it 400 times, but he also has, it seems Eitam Henkin points out that it could be something close to 10 times he's quoting it based on manuscript. Okay? Now, just to make a little more interesting, okay, so I remember a bunch of years back, Yeshurun had an issue dedicated a lot to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was very fond of the Meiri. Not only was the Chafetz Chaim fond, he was fond of the Meiri. He was so fond that it seems one night he was, one Motzei Shabbos, I think it was, or it was a late night. It wasn't a Motzei Shabbos. He was a late night, and he was feeling weak. And then they announced in Yerushalayim, there's a Levaya. Who's the Levaya? Avram Sefer. So even though he was weak and everything, he said he has to go. Why? So he says like this: I have a major hakaras toiv on the mifal ha'anak that he did by bringing to the Olam HaTorah the Sifrei Rabbeinu HaMeiri with beautiful haras. This is where Rav Shlomo Zalman felt he was weak and everything. He went late at night to the Levaya as a murdik hakaras toiv. So we see from that also Rav Shlomo Zalman had major chashivas for the Meiri, but more than that, in Rav Shlomo Zalman's writings and Shmir Shabbos Chassi, you'll see he also does. Another interesting story, just to throw it out there, which ties back to the Meiri in Ksav Yad, is that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said over a story, the Imri Emes, who was known to be a credible expert, amongst other things, besides being a Talmud Chacham, was a crazy expert on Seforim, but he had a massive, Meshunadika library that only recently have we begin to understand how great this library was from a book put out called Oil Rem from Moshe Hillel. Anyway, so what happens is that Rav Shlomo Zalman mentions that it seems he once was somewhere, and they show him a Ksav Yad, and Imri Emes, with tremendous Bekia, says that this is the Chiddushei Meiri on Shabbos, and I have a different one, and there's different shinuyim in the Masechta, and Bekitzer, he was able. He was in Eretz Yisrael, I think it was. So he recalled what he had, the manuscript. It wasn't published at the time, but he had this Miri on Shabbos, and he was able to see some differences and stuff from this other Ksaviyad, and identified that this really is the Miri. It seems is Moshe Hillel in the Sefer brings is of different parts. It seems later on they've realized that it might be a different chibur of the Meiri, and then more recently it seems that it might not even be the Meiri, it might be a Talmud of the Meiri, that there's two such works. Okay, but that's beyond the scope of today. Anyway, the point is that for the Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and the Mishnah Berurah, the Meiri is very important. Okay, now there is a famous shita of the Meiri, which we're definitely not going to go into, which so much ink has been spilled on this, about the Meiri shitas about Christianity, what it means is, and that could possibly, some people say it can't be that he even wrote whatever he wrote about Christianity, that it's not Avodah Zarah. So that could be when the Chazon Ish also, when he's saying it, that there's certain things crept into the Meiri. So let's say the Beis Yosef, when he brings down those 4 pieces of the Meiri, some say the Chazon Ish has no problem with it. It has the Beis Yosef. Some things that someone says, but then he will be, technically he might be more nervous. Okay, now, but it's not only that the Mishnah Berurah and Rav Shlomo Zalman or Auerbach are like this. Lamashal, searching in the Netziv's writings, and the Netziv is before the explosion of the Meiri's materials, he quotes the Meiri 146 times, and this is just searching in Meroi Meisada. So most of the Meiri wasn't even published, and he's still managing to quote a crazy amount of Meiris, and they're not only Meiris and Baba Kama for Yeshin Kavetzes, it's also Megillah, it's the stuff that's out there. Lamashal, Rebbe Tzal Ashkenazi, who just mentioned from Yeshin Kavetzes, he says, when he's talking about Amudei Hayra, in a specific tshuva, he says as follows, Harif Harambam Harama Harash Varav Hamiri. So he puts him in the lineup of the Amudei Hayra of the generations. Now, anyone who looks into Chaim Kanievsky's Seforim will see he quotes it a crazy amount of times. So is there any way to explain this Nakuda? So what I would say is that it seems. So first of all, I don't have a good answer. How does this work if the Chazon Ish is so anti-Miri? But it's clear, and this, for one example, this Tiger, he says that he also brings this this point with the Rambam, that it's very influential in helping understand the Rambam, and we see that there are definitely cases where it seems that Reb Chaim Kanievsky held, and this Tiger has a list in a sefer called Nezer Chaim, that there might have been certain stuff that somehow there was a mistake in the Meiri. Maybe someone put in something, somehow got inserted into the Ksaviyad, and that's what the Chazon Ish meant when I quoted in the outset. Someone told him there's a Meiri. He says, no, the Meiri didn't say such a thing, because he felt there is such a thing where the Meiri said. However, that might be what the Chazon Ish held. Even Rav Chaim Kanievsky quotes it literally hundreds and hundreds of times. I would say in the thousands, actually. But the Mishnah Berurah, as we said, uses it, Keseder, he even had the manuscript, and it seems that he was involved with getting it published. So Adkan, the next example of what Reb Chaim Kanievsky uses / Mishnah Berurah as opposed to the Chazon Ish.
Okay, excellent. Let's stop over here. We went a little over half an hour. We're trying to keep these somewhat shorter than previous ones. So, Rebbe Eliezer, thank you very much, and maybe let us know where you're going to pick up next time.
So next time I hope to continue with Rabbeinu Chananel
and
the Mishnah Berurah's usage of
Rabbeinu, and talk about this topic some more of Rishonim.
And then we're going to go further, and then after talking about Rabbeinu Chananel, we're going to go backwards and try to say, is Reb Chaim Kanievsky unique? Is the Chafetz Chaim unique of doing this? Or there's a previous Messiah, so to speak, of people doing this. That will be the next topic of Mirz Hashem, which we hope to record soon.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you to the sponsor. Again, for any questions or information, please email eliezerbrod@gmail.com or myself, shweidm@ou.org. We are also accepting sponsorships, for specific episodes. It could be Lili Nishmas or Rischos for anyone. And as Rabbi Dr. Brod mentioned, specific topics related, to this, so related to Daf Yomi or anything else is also perhaps available. Please come and be in touch with us. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.